And I'm just beginning Portuguese, right?
Okay. You tell me if she's lying when she says that she doesn't say.
Oi pessoal, tudo bem? No vídeo de hoje eu estou aqui com o meu professor que me dá aula aqui. E ele vai contar um pouquinho mais, falar o nome dele e tudo mais. E nós vamos ouvir um pouquinho da experiência que ele tem para passar como professor. Ele já viajou muito e ele me dá aula aqui de uma área de psicologia. Então a gente vai conversar um pouquinho com ele, bater um papo e vamos lá. Just for beginning, you say your name and your age. It's okay.
My name's Tony Paquin, and I'm 56.
Since when you teach in college?
Well, I got my PhD in 1997 from Texas A&M University, but I started teaching college about 2 years before that because as a graduate student, the first one was statistics, and then intro to psychology, intro to industrial organizational psychology, and then I also was teaching organizational behavior for the business school there.
And since when you started to teach here in WKU?
In 2004. Well, here I teach psychology courses, but at Texas, my area is called industrial organizational psychology. So you can be in a business school or a psych department.
And what you most like teaching in college? Have you ever had another experience, like in school? School like...
Yeah, I know. I was thinking, well, the closest, I did some work with special needs children, but that was in a camp setting. But my first year in graduate school, I was also a teacher's assistant in a first grade class, and I taught reading and writing to first graders.
Very cool.
Which was a lot of fun.
What is your best part of teaching college?
Probably being in front of the classroom, interacting with the student. That's my favorite part. My least favorite part is grading exams or writing, grading papers and stuff like that. If I didn't have to do that, my job would be a lot more fun. I know it's not fun to write papers and it's not fun to take exams, but it is not fun to either create them or to grade them.
And what do you think is the most struggle, like teaching to undergraduate students? What is the more hard part?
It depends on the subject, on the course. When I taught Introduction to Psychology, I did that for a number of years here. I taught it in the fall semester. And for many of the students in that class, it was their first time, first semester in college. And many of them were not prepared. And that was the hard part, was to try and convince them that yes, you do, even though no one's checking to see if you go to class, you probably should go to class. No one's checking to see if you've read the book, you probably should be reading the book. But it's new for a lot of them, and so that takes a while to figure that out. So that was the challenge in Intro to Psychology. Teaching statistics, the challenge is, at least with psychology students, is a lot of them tend to be anxious about any course that has math in it.
Yes, of course.
The challenge there is to convince people that to kind of relax and
it's gonna be okay.
It's gonna be okay. And I understand, because I didn't like math. I was never anxious about mathematics courses, but I never liked them. So that's the challenge with that. Any fall semester, it's their first time in college. Yes. It may be their first time away from home. So what may have gotten them successful in high school may not be the same that would be successful in college in terms of how much they have to study, what they have to read. For many of them, it's the first time they're away from home, so they're also homesick. It's the first time mom isn't checking to make sure that they're doing their homework or that they're in at a certain time or getting enough rest. And so they're dealing with all sorts of things this first semester.
And it's kind of different for Americans than Brazilians, because in Brazil it's not usually that when you get to in college you have to be away from your parents for your home. And here it's like a reality. All of the students, or I think almost all of the students, have to get away of their parents to go to study. So
yeah, most of them do. Although at Western, which is different from, well, let's say when I was a graduate student at Texas A&M, at Western, students stay here until Friday morning and most of them go home. At many other universities, that's not true. They here on the weekends too. So that's a little bit different than I was used to. I was very surprised at how much people went home here on the weekends. Of course, except for the international students who can't.
And have you ever taught to international students before, or is it the first time this semester?
No, I've right from the beginning. Even at Texas A&M, there was many international students, so some would be in my class. The first job I took after Texas, when I graduated, was at the Illinois Institute of Technology. The undergraduate psychology program was very, very small, maybe 20 students total, not 20 freshmen. So most of my students were either computer science majors or engineering students. A lot of those students were international, India, Pakistan, China. And so I did have to change my teaching a little bit because of that, because I was realizing that what works well with American students doesn't always work well with international students. And a good example was I had something I brought over from teaching in the business school at Texas A&M. I had like group debates. And so I would just randomly select people to be on the teams. I had a woman, I believe she was from India. I think they were 4-person teams. And she came to me before their debate and said, there were 2 other Indian students on their males. She said, nothing that I suggest in this presentation they are doing, because they're not listening to me at all because I'm female.
Really?
Yes, really. And she goes, I would be okay with that if their presentation was good, but their presentation is terrible. And I can't get them to change it. And so I said, okay, well, just tell me what you suggest and I'll grade it on the side. And after that, I went away from team debates and went to individual presentations because of cultural differences.
Yes.
And that culture, if you were female and you were with males, they were not going to listen to you, probably. So that was one of the first times where I realized I have to think a little bit differently. Some things that I was taught that this works to be an effective teacher, I was taught for working with American students, and it doesn't always work with non-American students. Now, some are fine. Some people adapt fine. Even though you are Brazilian, you know, there's the you bring that culture with you, but you can adapt to a
because
certain extent.
it also depends of how different is the cultures. Like our culture is like similar from here.
Yes.
So it's kind of different.
So that's when I first started knowing I have to change, and it all depends too. If the more I know about a culture, the easier it is for me to try to make some accommodations for students who are from that culture. If I don't know the culture, it's harder. I try to learn.
And do you think there are some difference between like American students and international students about grades, about punctuality, about assignment?
There is, but there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of variability. So it's not all American students are this way,
Yes.
all students from this culture are this way, that way. There's difference in, I'm a very informal teacher, and I'm okay with people calling me by my first name even if they're a student. There are some cultures where they're very uncomfortable with that. You know, so
Yes.
it's always Dr. Paquin or Professor Paquin. They're just not comfortable. I'm like, that's fine. In terms of punctuality, once again, it depends on the culture. And this is a stereotype. But I'm guessing if the student is German or Japanese, they will be there on time.
If they are Brazilians?
Maybe not so much. But individual students are different. You know, and I've had students, and American students, some students are very punctual and some are terrible.
It depends a lot.
It just depends. If you're from a culture where time, you know, 5 o'clock means somewhere between 5:30 and 6.
It's exactly this.
Okay, and it's your first semester here, then something probably has to be said, because I can't adjust the classroom to show up at some time with, you know. On the other hand, if you're an international student and you've been here for a year, you've probably already adjusted. You may not like it, but you've already adjusted. Now I have to think about more. It's more in issues of like group things. That's an issue that I have to consider more. Also, in terms of interaction in the classroom, our culture really promotes students asking questions and just, you know, it's no big deal to interrupt the professor and say, hey, I have a question. Or if I say, what do you think about this? They might tell me. There are other cultures where they're not used to that because they just go in and the professor lectures and they listen. I understand some students are going to have more of a problem with that, but even Americans, you do if you're introvert versus extrovert. I don't pick on anyone who doesn't answer back, now maybe for cultural reason or just personality. If I know you're from a country and I have enough of a relationship with the student where I don't think I'm going to freak them out by asking them in the middle of class, I may ask. But I know people, you know, if English is not your first language, you may be even more uncomfortable asking a question or something.
Sometimes it happens to me because I'm not like shy to the questions like in Brazil, not at all. But here I can like think, am I really doing this question because of my English, because I'm not comfortable with this. So.
But it's true not just of international students, because some American students are very introverted. It's just say, if you have a question, ask me. If you're not comfortable asking me in the classroom, just come see me.
And do you think there's some difference, what you told about the groups, like international students interact more with international students and American only interacts with Americans? How you see this in class, like this interaction?
I know that's true on campus, and that's not just true of this university or universities. When I was living in Tonga, it was easier to interact with people who were not Tongan than it was with the Tongans sometimes. Even if you were like from Japan or New Zealand or somewhere else, if we had nothing else in common, we could complain about living in Tonga. You know, so we had that in common. And so I know that happens with students here. In class, it really depends. I will see. Now, if there's an international student and there's one or two other international students in the thing, I will see sometimes they'll go together. Now, if they're from the same country, for sure.
Especially.
For sure, okay. If there's no other international student, well, there's no choice. But it varies. There are international students who seem to be very interactive with American students in the class and vice versa.
And about your experience, like around the world, you have already traveled to so many countries. How many countries have you been?
I'm getting close to 50.
My dream, one day.
I lived in Tonga for just over 2 years. That's where I was living before here. So my primary job wasn't to teach. I was in the Peace Corps, and my assignment was to run the continuing education program for the University of South Pacific's Tonga campuses. So my main job was as an administrator, but I also taught, some classes there. I taught statistics.
So did you have contacts with the students there?
Oh yeah. That was very challenging.
Very different from here.
Well, here's the thing. You come here, and I try to accommodate you because you're not from America, but it's an American classroom. There, it's not an American classroom. It's a Tongan classroom, okay? So,
what is the most different thing that you saw there?
Well, one of the things was about talking in class. Outside of the classroom, the problem is here, if you get an education, one of the motivations is hopefully it'll lead to a job or a career. In Tonga, not so much, because most people who get jobs, there aren't a lot of jobs, period. Most people work like on the plantations and stuff like that. So there aren't a lot of job openings. Most of those jobs go to people who know someone. So yes, you have to have the degree, but you also have to know someone. So if you already know someone, you're probably going to do fine. If you don't know anyone, getting a degree,
it's not everything.
It's not as helpful. So there's the motivation factor. But I remember running into situations where students don't like to talk so much. So I knew that. And I would throw a question out, and I'd put students together in groups to talk, and then I say, okay, talk about it for 10 minutes, and then I'll have each group. So that's a little different. That should fit with that culture. Of course, they were speaking in Tongan, and my Tongan wasn't very good, so I'm not sure what they were talking about. But I guess that not a lot of it was about what they were supposed to be, because when I brought them back and said, okay, what did you come up with? And this was very simple questions. I wasn't getting much reply. And I realized that they weren't doing the assignment. It wasn't so much cultural in the terms of that if a Tongan professor had asked them, they probably would have done it. But I think they were trying to take advantage of the fact I wasn't, because I didn't know what they were talking about. And so what I said to them was, my understanding is that it's not uncommon for teachers to beat their students in Tonga. Which is true. Corporal punishment is still very much about it there. I never planned on doing that, but I thought I'd be teaching adults, because it was college. I said, but if you don't want to act like adults, I don't have to treat you like adults. And then I said, if they're not going to do the work, you're wasting your village's money, so you shouldn't be in school. And I said, so if you don't want to work, don't come back. And some of them didn't. But they thought I was going to beat them if they didn't do it. Now, if you know me at all, my friends thought that was hilarious, because there's no way I was going to do that, but they didn't know that.
Yes.
And actually the students, the ones that didn't come back, well, they didn't come back, but the ones who did come back did participate a lot
more. Some
more.
of them didn't come back? And what do you think most change in a person when she goes study abroad? If I go study abroad, what most change in...
Oh, much change. Yes. What changes? Depends on your experience. I think the hope is that by studying abroad, you get a different perspective. And so you start to become more of a global citizen. You start to see the world more, not through just American eyes, but through other eyes. Yes. That's the hope. But to assume just because you go study abroad, that's going to happen and you're going to want to travel more, I think is very naive. Because I know people, they maybe not study abroad, but they go on a trip overseas and they have a horrible time. They go, oh my God, the food is terrible, the people aren't that friendly. I'm never going to leave this country again. But if you prepare them to look, so that they are able to look through different eyes there, or to try and get as much out of it as they can, I think that's the biggest change.
To see that it's a different culture, you have to respect, you have to look in different eyes, I think is good.
Yeah, and when you meet people who are not American, who you start to see America through their eyes, it's very interesting. I think first day of class for cross-cultural, I always tell the story. I was taking an overnight train from Paris to Madrid, and it was in a couchette. So it was four of us in a couchette, and they would drop the beds. Well, if we're not sleeping, we're all talking. And one of them asked me, I was with these three Spanish guys, and they said, can we answer a question about American TV? And I said, yeah, sure. And they said, is it true you can't show nudity on TV? And I said, yeah, that's true. On the cables you can, but on the networks usually you can't. They said, we heard that. But they said, is it true that you can show people killing each other on TV on the networks? And I was like, yeah. And so I never thought about it. This guy grew up in this culture, but it's absurd. I mean, God forbid my child see a naked body on TV, but it's okay for that child to see Arnold Schwarzenegger kill 20 people, provided there's not too much blood.
It depends on the culture first.
Yeah, so I never thought that that's weird. Our culture is weird that way until I saw it through someone else's eyes. I think experiences like that are really interesting. And in my cross-cultural class, I try to do that in the classroom, but it's much stronger if you experience yourself out there.
Like you change your thoughts about the words when you have this experience abroad.
Yeah. And I grew up, my family did not travel at all. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. And I can probably count on my fingers as a child growing up that I was further than an hour from my house. The beach was an hour away. We'd go to the beach once or twice a year. That was about the furthest we would go. And so I wanted to travel, but my family wasn't interested, and we didn't have the money. So I decided I was going to do it when I had the chance. So I grew up in a very homogenous town. I mean, the town has changed, but when I was there, it was predominantly white. It was predominantly Catholic, of French-Canadian descent. So it was very similar. So going out and getting other people's perspectives was always really interesting. Don't always agree with what they say, but it was interesting to hear their opinion.
Okay, that's all. Thanks so much for your time, forgot the words, sharing this experience with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
I just finished in Portuguese, alright.
Sure. As long as you don't say bad things about me on there. No, the reason why I say that is when I was working on my dissertation, I was in Europe for a while, and I was in Sweden. And a Swedish newspaper, they said they're going to interview us. And I said, okay. And we sat around the table, and the people from the Swedish newspaper, they'd ask the Swedish consultants who spoke English, but they'd ask them all the questions in Swedish, and they'd answer, and then they'd turn to me and ask me a question. Now, I had no idea what they just said, so I didn't know what I was saying was countering what was just said, or it was a very odd feeling. And so they sent me the newspaper article, and I wrote back and I said, you've got to send me the English translation, because it was all in Swedish.
I only can't see the picture.
There's my picture with the other people in this Swedish interview. I have no idea what I supposedly said or didn't say, so that's why.
Então, pessoal, espero que tenham gostado desse vídeo, dele estar aqui conosco para poder responder essas perguntas e compartilhar essa experiência conosco. Então, se gostou desse vídeo, clique em gostei, não esquece de se inscrever no canal aqui embaixo para você receber todos os próximos vídeos. E me segue lá nas redes sociais também. Um super beijo. Bye. Bye.
Bye.